The Duke of Blackthorne signed his wife's imprisonment order without reading her defense. Then he handed the pen to his ambitious cousin, Lord Percival Vale, the very man who had advised him to accuse her. Rosalind stood at the far end of the long library table, surrounded by 6 trustees of the Blackthorne Widows' Fund, 2 magistrates, and the uniformed officer who had arrived to arrest her. 30 forged bonds lay scattered across the polished mahogany between them. Each document bore her name. Each promised money the fund did not possess. Together, they represented £30,000 that had vanished without leaving so much as a single legitimate entry in her ledgers. "Adrian," Rosalind said, forcing herself to keep her voice steady, "the dates do not correspond with the quarterly accounts. Allow me 10 minutes with the original register, and I can prove it." Her husband did not look at her. Adrian Blackthorne remained seated beneath the portrait of his grandfather, his shoulders rigid beneath a black evening coat. His face, the face she had once trusted more than her own judgment, had become an expressionless mask. "The register was kept under your authority," he said. "Anything written in it would merely reflect what you wished others to believe." Rosalind felt those words more sharply than if he had struck her. For 6 years, she had transformed the neglected charity from a ceremonial obligation into a functioning refuge for soldiers' widows. She had negotiated rents, examined applications, traced false claims, and invested every unused pound with a caution that had earned the trustees' respect. Until that morning. Now Mrs. Wycliffe, whose husband had died at Waterloo, stared at Rosalind as if she were a stranger. Sir Matthew Crane avoided her eyes altogether. Only Reverend Ellison appeared troubled, though not troubled enough to speak. Lord Percival slowly capped the Duke's pen. "Her Grace has always possessed an unusual talent for figures," he observed. "Such talent can preserve a fortune, or conceal its theft." Rosalind turned toward him. Percival's pale gloves were immaculate. His silver waistcoat shimmered in the candlelight, and a faint, satisfied curve touched his mouth before vanishing. He had been appointed to the fund's supervisory board 8 weeks earlier, at Adrian's insistence. Rosalind had objected because Percival had never managed anything more complicated than his gambling debts. Adrian had accused her of resenting his family. Now Percival controlled the accusation against her. "Where are my personal account books?" Rosalind asked. "Secured," Percival replied. "By whom?" "By men loyal to Blackthorne." "Then they should have been delivered here." A brief silence followed. Rosalind saw Adrian's fingers tighten around the arm of his chair. He had noticed the evasion. For one fleeting second, she believed he might finally question it. Instead, he rose. "You were given the opportunity to explain the missing money. I was given 40 minutes after my study had already been searched. You denied signing the bonds, because I did not sign them." Adrian picked up the top document and held it toward her. "That is your hand. It resembles my hand. And your seal." "My seal disappeared 3 weeks ago. I informed you. You told me it had been misplaced. I told you the lock on my writing desk had been scratched." Percival gave a soft sigh, as though Rosalind's insistence embarrassed him. Convenient recollections often come after evidence is discovered. Rosalind ignored him. "Adrian, look at the witness's signature. Mr. Bellamy supposedly witnessed this bond in April, yet he had been confined to his sickbed since February. I have looked at enough." "No, you have listened to enough." The trustees shifted uneasily. Adrian's face hardened. Rosalind knew that expression. It appeared whenever he believed his authority had been challenged before other men. In private, he could reconsider. In public, pride became a locked door. "You will not turn this inquiry into an attack upon me," he said. "I am asking you to examine the evidence before destroying my name. The Blackthorne name is precisely what I am protecting." The room fell silent. Rosalind's breath caught, but she refused to lower her eyes. She understood then that this was not merely about missing money. Adrian had spent months pursuing a royal appointment to the Treasury Commission. Any public suspicion surrounding his household could ruin him. He needed the scandal contained, and it was easier to sacrifice one wife than an entire political future. The officer stepped forward. "Your Grace, I must ask you to surrender your reticule and accompany me." Rosalind pressed one hand against the small velvet bag hanging from her wrist. Inside it were no jewels, only a key, a pencil, several coins, and the embroidered strip on which she recorded each bond's serial number using colored stitches. It was a habit her father had taught her when she was a girl. Never trust an important figure to a single ledger. Percival extended his hand. "I shall preserve it with the other evidence." Rosalind looked at his waiting palm and knew that if he obtained the reticule, the last independent record of the fund's legitimate bonds would disappear. "I will surrender it to the arresting officer," she said. "The contents concern the estate. They concern my defense." Adrian's gaze moved to the reticule. Give it to Percival. There it was, the moment in which he could still choose differently. Rosalind searched her husband's face for doubt, affection, or even the memory of the woman who had sat beside him through his father's funeral and prevented Blackthorne's creditors from dismantling the estate. She found only impatience. Slowly, she untied the velvet ribbon from her wrist. Percival reached for the bag. Rosalind let it fall. The reticule struck the floor, spilling coins and a silver pencil across the carpet. As everyone looked down, she swept the narrow embroidered strip beneath the hem of her gown with the side of her shoe. Then she bent, gathered the remaining objects, and placed the empty bag in Percival's hand. His fingers closed around it. For the first time, his composure faltered. He glanced inside, then looked directly at her. He knew something was missing. The officer fastened cold iron around Rosalind's wrists. Adrian turned his face away as the shackles clicked shut. She was led through the great hall, beneath the stares of servants she had known for years. Outside, rain glazed the waiting prison carriage. Rosalind lifted her skirt with bound hands and climbed inside without allowing anyone to assist her. At the prison, the jailer removed her cloak, searched her sleeves, and took the pins from her hair, but the embroidered strip remained concealed inside the narrow channel of her gown's hem. Her cell smelled of damp stone, old straw, and extinguished tallow. A dented cup stood beside a wooden pallet. On the opposite wall, someone had scratched a row of dates into the mortar. Rosalind sat in darkness and began counting the stitches hidden beneath her fingers. 112 legitimate bonds. The accusation papers contained 113. There was an extra number, one that had never existed in her records. A faint movement came from the neighboring cell. "Duchess," a woman whispered through the wall. "Do not let them hear you counting." Rosalind went still. "Who are you?" The woman drew a ragged breath. "I slept in your cell last night. They moved me before dawn because I saw the man who brought the forged bonds." Boots sounded at the end of the corridor. The woman's voice dropped to a terrified murmur. He was wearing the Blackthorne crest. The footsteps stopped outside Rosalind's door. A key entered the lock. The cell door opened, and a broad-shouldered guard stepped inside carrying a lantern. Rosalind recognized him as the man who had searched her when she arrived. His name, stitched crudely above his coat pocket, was Mercer. His eyes moved from her face to the hem of her gown, then toward the wall separating her from the unseen woman. "On your feet. Where are you taking me? You have a visitor. At this hour?" Mercer did not answer. He seized Rosalind's arm and pulled her into the corridor. As they passed the neighboring cell, Rosalind caught a glimpse through its narrow opening. A thin woman stood behind the bars, one hand pressed over her mouth. Her gray dress was torn at the shoulder, and a dark bruise encircled her throat. The woman raised two fingers, then pointed urgently toward Mercer's coat. Rosalind followed the gesture. One of his brass buttons bore the Blackthorne crest. It was identical to the one the woman claimed had belonged to the man who delivered the forged bonds. Mercer noticed Rosalind staring and buttoned his coat, Keep moving. He escorted her through 2 iron gates and into a cramped interview room. A single candle burned on the table. Lord Percival Vale stood beside the window, still dressed in his silver waistcoat and pale gloves. Rosalind stopped. The prison was nearly a mile from Blackthorne House. Percival could only have arrived so quickly if he had followed her carriage. "You should not be here without my solicitor," she said. Percival smiled. "Your solicitor resigned this evening. Mr. Harcourt has represented my family for 15 years, and he has no desire to be associated with a woman accused of stealing from widows." Rosalind lowered herself into the chair, refusing to reveal how deeply the news unsettled her. Mr. Harcourt possessed copies of her marriage settlement and the earliest records of the fund. If he had truly abandoned her, Percival would gain access to documents that went far beyond the accusation. Percival placed her empty reticule on the table. "You removed something before surrendering this." "I dropped it, and used the confusion to conceal an object." "You appear remarkably certain." "I know how your mind works." "No," Rosalind replied. "You know how you wish Adrian to believe it works." The smile disappeared from his face. Percival sat opposite her and removed a folded paper from inside his coat. "His Grace is prepared to offer you a merciful resolution. Sign a confession, surrender your claim to the fund, and agree to live separately from the Duke. In return, the criminal complaint will be withdrawn." Rosalind examined the paper without touching it. The settlement allowed her an annual income barely sufficient to rent 2 rooms. It barred her from contacting any widow connected to the charity and required her to accept sole responsibility for the missing money. Most revealing of all, it transferred control of the fund to Percival. "You wrote this before I was arrested," she said. His eyes flickered. "The document is dated yesterday." "A clerical precaution. You prepared my confession before the trustees saw the bonds." Percival leaned back. "Sign it, Rosalind. Why should an innocent woman confess? Because innocence is powerless without evidence." He placed Adrian's signet ring beside the confession. Rosalind's heartbeat quickened. Her husband never removed that ring. It had belonged to every Duke of Blackthorne for more than a century, and its crest authenticated estate contracts, private instructions, and sealed transfers. "How did you obtain that?" "Adrian entrusted it to me." "Or you took it." "You still believe your husband will rescue you once he discovers some minor inconsistency." Percival's voice softened. "He will not. His appointment to the Treasury Commission is to be announced within the week. If sacrificing you protects that appointment, he will call the sacrifice necessary." Rosalind remembered Adrian refusing to examine the witness's signature. His silence as the shackles closed around her wrists had already supplied the answer she did not want to accept. Yet she also remembered something else. 3 nights earlier, Adrian had complained that the stone in his signet ring had loosened. Rosalind had suggested sending it to the family jeweler, but he had placed it in his locked desk instead. If Percival possessed it now, then either Adrian had truly granted him extraordinary authority, or someone had entered the study using the same access required to copy the obsolete account book. Rosalind lifted the confession. Percival watched her fingers closely. "The Widow's Fund owns 3 cottages on Mill Street," she said. "What becomes of them under this agreement? They will be sold. To whom? That is irrelevant. Nothing involving their homes is irrelevant." His jaw tightened. "The properties are required to cover the deficit you created. The cottages are held in trust. They cannot legally be sold unless all 7 trustees approve. 6 approvals will be sufficient after your conviction." There were 7 trustees, including Rosalind. The 6 men who had stood in the library were therefore not merely witnesses. Percival had gathered every vote he needed. The missing £30,000 was only the first stage. Once Rosalind was removed, he intended to liquidate the charity's property, and perhaps Blackthorne land as well. She folded the confession along its existing crease. "I will sign." Percival's expression brightened. "But not tonight. I want one amendment guaranteeing the widows cannot be evicted before winter." "You are hardly in a position to negotiate. Then return me to my cell, and explained to Adrian why his wife refused the quiet solution you promised him. That struck its target. Percival had assured Adrian she would surrender. A public trial would expose the estate's accounts and endanger the Duke's political appointment. After a long pause, Percival stood. "You have until 9 tomorrow morning." He swept up the confession, but left the signet ring on the table. Rosalind covered it with her hand before he noticed. Percival reached the door, then turned. His gaze dropped to the tabletop. The ring was gone. For one terrible second, neither of them moved. Then a commotion erupted in the corridor. A woman screamed, followed by the crash of an iron bucket. Mercer shouted for assistance. Percival cursed and stepped outside. Rosalind slipped the signet ring into the lining of her sleeve. Through the open doorway, she saw 2 guards dragging the bruised woman from the neighboring cell. The prisoner twisted desperately in their grip. "Mrs. Hale," Percival snapped. "You were supposed to be moved before she arrived." The woman looked directly at Rosalind. "My name is not Hale," she cried. "Ask the Duke what happened to Clara Bellamy." Mercer struck her across the face. Rosalind froze. Bellamy, the same name as the dead clerk whose signature appeared on the forged bond. Before the guards dragged her away, Clara broke free long enough to throw a small scrap of paper into the interview room. It slid beneath the table near Rosalind's foot. Percival turned back. Rosalind stepped on the scrap before he could see it. Written across one corner in faded blue ink were 4 words. Adrian signed the first one. Percival snatched the scrap from beneath Rosalind's shoe before she could hide it. He read the 4 words, and all color drained from his face. "Where did you get this?" "From the woman your guards just assaulted. She is deranged. She is Clara Bellamy. She claims to be many people, but you recognized her." Percival crushed the paper in his fist. "You will sign the confession at 9. He called for Mercer, then searched the table for the missing signet ring. Rosalind kept her arms folded, concealing the weight inside her sleeve. "If you have taken something else, perhaps you should search your own pockets more carefully." Mercer entered. Percival ordered him to return Rosalind to her cell and ensure she spoke to no one. As Mercer pushed her into the corridor, Rosalind looked toward the stairwell where Clara had disappeared. A thin streak of blood marked the stones. "What will happen to her?" Rosalind asked. "Not your concern. She is a witness. She is a debtor." Rosalind stopped walking. "What debt?" Mercer tightened his grip on her arm. £500 owed to Vale Shipping, Lord Percival's company. Clara was not imprisoned because of some unrelated debt. Percival had placed her there where he could control her and intended to move her before Rosalind arrived. Back in her cell, Rosalind waited until Mercer's footsteps faded. Then she removed Adrian's ring from her sleeve and held it near the barred opening. The crest was genuine, but the blue stone was not loose. This was not the ring Adrian had shown her 3 nights ago. It was a duplicate. Rosalind examined the metal closely. A jeweler copying the Blackthorne signet would need either the original ring or a wax impression. Percival already possessed access to both. With such a duplicate, he could seal transfers, orders, and bonds in the Duke's name. But Clara's warning would not leave Rosalind's mind. Adrian signed the first one. Perhaps Percival had not begun with forgery. Perhaps he had persuaded Adrian to authorize one legitimate transaction, then multiplied it into dozens. Rosalind tore a strip from her petticoat and wrapped the ring inside it. She loosened a stone near the pallet and concealed the bundle in the gap. At dawn, footsteps approached again. This time, Reverend Ellison stood outside the cell with a Bible pressed against his chest. "I was granted 10 minutes," he said. Mercer remained at the end of the corridor, watching them. Rosalind moved close to the bars. "Did you examine the bonds after I left?" Ellison glanced toward the guard. "Lord Percival removed them." "Of course he did. I should have spoken yesterday." "Yes." Her bluntness made him flinch. Rosalind had no patience left for the remorse of men who remained silent when courage was required. Ellison lowered his voice. Mrs. Wycliffe visited me last night. She claims you personally gave her a bond 6 months ago. I gave her a certificate of deposit, not a bond. She says you signed it in her cottage. I have never conducted fund business inside a beneficiary's home. Ellison removed a folded document from the Bible. She entrusted this to me. Rosalind studied it through the bars. The signature resembled hers, but the paper carried a serial number from the non-existent sequence. Turn it over. On the back was an endorsement transferring the certificate to Vale Shipping as security for a loan. Mrs. Wycliffe cannot read, Rosalind said. Someone convinced her to mark this without understanding it. Ellison's expression darkened. There are 19 more like it. Percival had used the widows' names to borrow against the fund's properties. Once the loans defaulted, his company could claim their cottages legally. Bring one of these documents to the magistrate, Rosalind said. He is a shareholder in Vale Shipping. Then take it to Sir Matthew. He departed London before dawn. One by one, Percival was removing everyone who might help her. Rosalind looked down at Ellison's Bible. Is that your personal copy? Yes. I need your pencil. He hesitated, then slipped a small pencil through the bars. Rosalind tore a blank corner from the document and wrote 3 instructions. Find the jeweler who had repaired Adrian's ring, locate Mr. Bellamy's death record, and protect Clara before Percival moved her again. Deliver this to my maid, Agnes Finch. No one else. Ellison hid the note inside his Bible. Before he could leave, the prison doors opened below. Men's voices echoed up the stairwell. Mercer hurried toward them. A moment later, Adrian appeared in the corridor. Rosalind's heart betrayed her with one painful beat of hope. Her husband stopped outside the cell. He looked exhausted, as if he had not slept, but there was no apology in his face. Leave us, he ordered Ellison. When they were alone, Adrian held up a familiar document. I came to ask you one question. It was the original bond, the one Clara claimed he had signed. Rosalind looked at the signature, then at him. Did you authorize it? Adrian's silence answered her. You did. I believed it was a temporary transfer. To whom? His jaw tightened. Percival. Rosalind closed her eyes briefly. The first stolen sum had entered Percival's hands with Adrian's full permission. How much? £5,000. The confession named 30,000. Percival had turned Adrian's single reckless signature into an entire fraudulent series. Release me, Rosalind said. We must secure the ledgers before he destroys them. Adrian did not move. I cannot. Why? Because Percival has just presented 5 witnesses who swear they saw you forge my name. Rosalind stared at him. Then Adrian placed another paper against the bars. It was an order authorizing her transfer to Newgate Prison before noon. At the bottom stood Adrian's signature. This time, she knew it was real. Rosalind stared at Adrian's signature until the letters blurred. The transfer order was genuine. She recognized the hard downward stroke of the final E, the small blot Adrian always left when he signed in anger, and the faint scrape where his ring brushed the paper. You are sending me to Newgate, only until the hearing. Women awaiting trial have died there before a hearing was ever scheduled. Adrian lowered the document. Percival says someone attempted to contact you during the night. This prison is no longer secure. Percival is the danger. He has 5 witnesses, and I have Clara Bellamy. His expression changed at the name. You know who she is, Rosalind said. Bellamy's daughter disappeared after his death. She did not disappear. Percival imprisoned her for a manufactured debt. Adrian glanced toward the corridor. Where is she? Your guards dragged her away. They are not my guards. One wears the Blackthorne crest. For the first time, Adrian looked genuinely alarmed. He called Mercer, but no one answered. The corridor had become unnaturally quiet. Rosalind gripped the bars. Revoke the transfer. Summon an independent magistrate and secure Percival's offices. I cannot act on accusations made by a prisoner desperate to avoid trial. I am your wife. I am your wife. You are also the woman whose signature appears on 30 fraudulent bonds. And you are the man who signed the first. Adrian flinched. Rosalind had once protected him from humiliation. Now she saw clearly how that protection had fed his certainty that every mistake could be hidden, corrected, or blamed upon someone less powerful. You authorized £5,000 without consulting the trustees, she said. Why? Percival claimed Vale Shipping had secured a government supply contract. The return would have restored the fund before the quarterly review. You gambled widows' savings to improve the estate's accounts. I intended to repay it. With what? Adrian said nothing. The commission required proof that Blackthorne was financially stable, Rosalind continued. You wanted the appointment so badly that you used charitable money to disguise your debts. His silence confirmed it. Percival had not forced him. He had merely offered Adrian a convenient path, and Adrian had chosen it. If the first bond becomes public, my appointment is finished, he said. So you signed my transfer to protect yourself. I signed it to prevent a scandal until I know the truth. You know enough. A door slammed below. Men shouted, followed by the rattle of chains. Adrian stepped toward the stairs, but Rosalind caught his sleeve through the bars. Search Percival's silver waistcoat. The duplicate signet ring was in his pocket. Adrian looked at his bare right hand. My ring is at Blackthorne House. No, your ring is hidden beneath a loose stone in this cell. Percival left it during his visit. He visited you? Minutes after I arrived. Adrian crouched beside the pallet and found the wrapped bundle. When he uncovered the ring, his face hardened. This is not mine. Yet it carries your crest. Compare every seal Percival produced with that ring. A distant scream cut through the prison. Clara. Adrian rushed into the corridor. Rosalind called after him, but he disappeared down the stairs. Moments later, smoke began curling beneath the door at the far end. A bell rang. Fire! Someone shouted. Prisoners began screaming and striking their doors. Smoke thickened across the ceiling as guards ran toward the exit instead of releasing the women. Rosalind tore fabric from her petticoat, soaked it in the water cup, and pressed it over her mouth. Heat spread rapidly through the corridor. This was no accident. Someone wanted Clara silenced before Adrian could reach her, and Rosalind's death would erase the need for a confession. Through the smoke, Reverend Ellison appeared with a ring of stolen keys. Mercer locked the outer gate, he shouted. I cannot find the correct key. Clara first, Rosalind ordered. Where did they take her? To the basement. Rosalind directed him to unlock her cell. They hurried toward the stairs, but flames were already climbing the wooden door below. Ellison recoiled. There must be another way. The debt records, Rosalind said. Where are they kept? In the clerk's office. Every prison needs a secure route for moving documents during a fire. They entered the abandoned office and found a narrow service passage behind a cabinet. Rosalind lifted her skirt and descended the stone steps, with Ellison following close behind. Smoke filled the basement. They found Clara chained to a wall near a pile of burning records. Ellison struggled with the keys while Rosalind smothered the nearest flames beneath her gown. Clara's eyes fluttered open. Percival took the ledger, she whispered. What ledger? My father's private ledger. It proves where the money went. The lock opened. They carried Clara into the passage just as part of the ceiling collapsed behind them. At the far end stood a bolted iron door. Rosalind inserted the prison key, but it would not turn. Footsteps approached from the other side. Stand back, Adrian shouted. He rammed the door twice before the bolt broke. Cold air rushed into the passage. Adrian pulled Clara through, then reached for Rosalind. She ignored his hand and helped Ellison out herself. Outside, flames consumed the upper floor. Prisoners crowded the yard while guards attempted to restore order. Percival was nowhere to be seen. Clara gripped Rosalind's wrist. He is going to the bank. Why? The forged bonds were never meant only to steal the widow's fund. Clara coughed violently. They were created to make Blackthorne insolvent. Adrian went still. Clara reached inside her torn dress and produced a small iron key. My father hid the original ledger in a deposit box. The bank opens at 9. Rosalind looked toward the prison clock. It was 8:30. Then a carriage bearing the Vale crest raced away at the end of the street. Percival had a 30-minute lead. Adrian ordered his carriage brought forward, but Rosalind stopped him. Percival will expect us to follow. And you propose we allow him to reach the bank? I propose we stop arriving exactly where he wants us. Clara could barely stand. Smoke had blackened her face, and blood stained the collar of her dress. Reverend Ellison supported her while prisoners and guards crowded the yard around them. Rosalind turned to Clara. Which bank? Harrington and Blythe, Threadneedle Street. What name is on the deposit box? Clara hesitated. My father's. Then Percival cannot open it with the key alone. He has my father's death certificate and a forged document naming Vale Shipping as executor. Adrian swore beneath his breath. Rosalind studied the burning prison. Percival had destroyed records, attempted to kill Clara, and ensured chaos would delay pursuit. The bank was important, but it might be another distraction. What exactly is inside the ledger? She asked. My father recorded every payment Percival ordered him to disguise. Bribes, false loans, and money transferred from the widow's fund. Does it contain Adrian's first bond? Yes. Adrian looked away. And the remaining forged bonds? Clara shook her head. Those were produced later by another clerk. Who? I never learned his name. Rosalind understood. Even if they secured the ledger, it would prove Percival's theft, but not necessarily clear her of forging the remaining bonds. He had divided the evidence deliberately, so no single document could expose the entire scheme. She faced Ellison. Take Clara somewhere Percival cannot reach her. The church? Too obvious. Bring her to Mrs. Wycliffe's cottage. Percival believes the widows are frightened and powerless. Ellison nodded. Adrian moved closer. You are still under arrest. I can delay the transfer, but I cannot simply release you. Rosalind met his gaze. Then remain here and explain that to the magistrate while Percival takes your estate. She walked toward the carriage. After a moment, Adrian followed. During the journey, neither spoke. Rosalind sat opposite the husband who had sent her to prison, her burned skirts filling the narrow space between them. His face was streaked with soot, and a shallow cut marked his temple. Once she would have cleaned the blood away. Now she watched the streets through the window. At a crossing near Cheapside, Adrian finally broke the silence. The transfer order was meant to protect you. No, I believed Newgate had stronger security. You signed it after Percival told you where I should be confined. Adrian's hands closed into fists. I did not know he intended to burn the prison, but you knew he needed me silent. I thought he was protecting Blackthorne. You chose to believe that because it protected you. The truth settled between them. Adrian did not apologize. Perhaps he understood that an apology offered while she still wore prison soot would be another demand upon her. To comfort him, forgive him, and make his remorse easier to bear. The carriage stopped outside Harrington and Blythe at 9:09. A clerk locked the front door as they approached. The bank is closed, he announced. It opened 9 minutes ago, Rosalind said. An emergency audit has been ordered. Through the window, she saw Percival speaking with an elderly banker. 2 wooden document boxes rested on the counter. Adrian pounded on the door. Open this immediately in the name of the Duke of Blackthorne. The clerk glanced toward Percival. That single look told Rosalind whom the bank truly obeyed. Percival approached the glass. I regret that Her Grace escaped custody, he said through the door. The magistrate has issued a warrant for anyone assisting her. Adrian's face hardened. You used my seal. You authorized me to act for the estate. I did not authorize forgery. Percival smiled. You signed the first bond and accepted the financial benefit. Shall we discuss the distinction before the Treasury Commission? Adrian fell silent. Percival had trapped him perfectly. Exposing the scheme would also expose Adrian's misuse of charitable funds. Rosalind stepped toward the glass. You prepared a confession for me before the accusation was presented. A sensible precaution. You also forged certificates in the names of women who cannot read. Can you prove it? Not yet. His smile widened. Rosalind looked beyond him toward the deposit boxes. The larger one carried Mr. Bellamy's name. The smaller bore the crest of Blackthorne. Percival had not merely come for the private ledger. He was removing something from Adrian's own deposit box. "What is stored in the Blackthorne box?" she asked. Adrian frowned. "The original mortgage deeds. If Percival obtains them, can he sell the estate? No, not without my signature." Rosalind thought of the duplicate signet ring. "He does not require your signature anymore." She turned to the street, searching for another entrance. A narrow alley ran beside the bank toward a delivery yard. "Keep him at the front," she told Adrian. "Where are you going?" "To do what you should have allowed me to do from the beginning. Examine the evidence." Rosalind slipped into the alley. At the rear of the building, a delivery boy was unloading coal. She gave him the last coin the prison guards had overlooked and exchanged her scorched cloak for his stained work coat. Inside the coal cellar, she found a service stair leading upward. Voices drifted from the banking hall. Percival was instructing the manager to burn the Bellamy ledger after copying 2 pages. Rosalind moved closer. The smaller Blackthorne box stood open. Inside lay several mortgage deeds, Adrian's private correspondence, and her original personal ledger, the one Percival claimed had been secured at the estate. He had placed it in Adrian's deposit box to make the Duke appear responsible for hiding it. Rosalind reached for the ledger. A hand seized her from behind. She twisted, ready to strike, but found Agnes Finch, her maid, staring back at her. "Your Grace," Agnes whispered, "Reverend Ellison found me." "Why are you here?" "To warn you. Someone entered your study last night and replaced every page in your account book." Rosalind looked at the ledger in the box. If she carried it out, Percival could claim she had attempted to steal or destroy the principal evidence against her. Before she could answer, the service door opened. The elderly bank manager stood on the threshold with 2 constables. Percival appeared behind him. "There she is," he said, caught with the stolen ledger in her hands. The constables advanced. Then Agnes stepped between them and Rosalind. "No," the maid said, raising a sealed envelope. "I am the one you want." Percival's expression changed. Rosalind recognized the handwriting on the envelope. It belonged to Mr. Bellamy, and across the front he had written, "To be opened only if my daughter is imprisoned, or I am found dead." Percival lunged for the envelope. Agnes pulled it against her chest, but one constable seized her wrist while the other moved toward Rosalind. "Touch either woman," Adrian said from the doorway, "and you will answer to me." Everyone turned. The Duke entered with 2 uniformed officers from the city marshal's office. His eyes settled on the open Blackthorne deposit box and then on Rosalind's original ledger. Percival recovered first. "Your wife was caught attempting to steal evidence." "She entered the bank under my authority," Adrian said. Rosalind knew that was untrue. Adrian had not even known her plan. Yet this was the first time since the accusation that he had used his power to protect her instead of himself. It did not erase what he had done, but it altered the room. The constable released Agnes. Percival held out his hand. "The envelope belongs to Vale Shipping." "It bears Mr. Bellamy's private seal," Rosalind replied. "Only Clara Bellamy may authorize its opening. Clara Bellamy is dead." "No," said Reverend Ellison from the rear entrance. "She is standing outside with 3 witnesses." Percival's expression cracked. Rosalind took the envelope from Agnes. "Where did you find this?" "Behind the lining of your writing desk," Agnes said. "Mr. Bellamy gave it to me 2 months ago. He said I must hide it somewhere Lord Percival would never search." "Why my desk?" "Because he trusted you." Percival's eyes moved toward the bank manager. "Remove them." The manager did not respond. Adrian stepped beside the counter. Until ownership of these documents is determined, nothing leaves this bank. You cannot afford an investigation, Percival said quietly. The Treasury Commission meets tomorrow. Adrian looked at Rosalind's burned gown, then at the prison soot still darkening her face. No appointment is worth what I have already done. Rosalind felt no gratitude. He had arrived at the truth only after the consequences threatened him personally. Still, his declaration stripped Percival of the weapon that had controlled him. Percival turned toward the service door. The city officers blocked his path. Clara entered with Ellison supporting her. The bruises on her throat were visible above her torn collar. When she saw Percival, she trembled, but continued walking. "That is my father's letter," she said. "Open it." Rosalind broke the wax seal. Inside were 2 pages and a small brass token stamped with the number 47. The first page was a signed statement from Mr. Bellamy. He described how Percival had persuaded Adrian to authorize a £5,000 investment from the Widow's Fund. When the shipping contract failed, Percival ordered Bellamy to conceal the loss by transferring money between accounts. Bellamy had refused to create false bonds. 3 days later, he had been dismissed. A month after that, he died from what the physician called a sudden fever. Clara gripped the counter. "My father was not ill until he drank wine sent from Vale House." Percival laughed once, too loudly. The accusation of a grieving daughter. Rosalind continued reading. The second page contained a list of payments made to a copying clerk named Thomas Red. Beside Red's name appeared an address near the London docks and a warning. He possesses the copper plate used to reproduce Her Grace's signature. The evidence finally formed a clear chain. Percival had obtained Rosalind's obsolete ledger, copied her signature onto a metal plate, and used Adrian's first legitimate bond as the template for the remaining series. But the page proved only Bellamy's claim. They still needed the copper plate and Red's testimony. Rosalind examined the brass token. 47, she said. "Another deposit box?" Clara shook her head. "My father never mentioned it." Agnes looked at the token. "That is not from this bank." The manager leaned closer. "It belongs to the bonded warehouses at Wapping." Rosalind turned to Adrian. The missing fund money was transferred through Vale shipping. Percival would need somewhere to store the goods supposedly purchased with it. "There were no goods," Percival said. "Then what is inside warehouse 47? His silence answered her. One of the city officers reached for Percival's arm. The bank manager suddenly drew a pistol from beneath the counter. Everyone remained still. Adrian moved in front of Rosalind. The manager aimed at Clara. Percival swept Bellamy's statement from Rosalind's hands and thrust it into the candle flame. Rosalind seized the water pitcher and threw it. The flame died beneath shattered glass before more than one corner of the paper could burn. The pistol fired. Adrian staggered backward. Rosalind caught him as blood spread across his shoulder. The officers rushed the manager, but Percival escaped through the rear door carrying the brass token. Clara stared after him in horror. "He will destroy everything in the warehouse." Rosalind pressed her hand against Adrian's wound. His face had gone pale, but the bullet had passed through the flesh below his collarbone. "Go," he said through clenched teeth. She looked at the man who had condemned her, then at the door through which Percival had vanished. "I will send a surgeon. Rosalind, I am not abandoning an innocent man," she said, "but neither will I sacrifice the truth to remain beside a guilty one." She stood and gave the damaged Bellamy statement to Ellison. Then Agnes pointed through the window. Across the street, Percival climbed into a carriage with Mercer. Between them sat a third passenger whose hands were bound. Mr. Harcourt, Rosalind's supposedly resigned solicitor, and chained to his wrist was a black case bearing the seal of the Royal Treasury Commission. Rosalind sent Agnes to summon additional city officers, then climbed into the nearest hired carriage with Clara and Reverend Ellison. Adrian remained at the bank while a surgeon treated his shoulder. Before the carriage departed, he pressed his authority seal into Ellison's hand. "Use it to enter the warehouse," he said. Rosalind looked at him through the window. "Your seal created this disaster." "I know." The simplicity of his answer unsettled her more than an excuse would have. The carriage raced east toward Wapping. Clara clutched Bellamy's damaged statement, while Rosalind studied the notes taken from her embroidered bond record. "The forge sequence ends with number 113, Rosalind said. "Why create exactly one extra bond?" "To transfer ownership of the warehouse," Clara replied. "No, a warehouse transfer would require more than a charity bond." Ellison examined the black case they had seen chained to Harcourt. "What if the final bond concerns the Treasury Commission?" Rosalind understood. Percival had used the Blackthorne estate and Widows' Fund to build false proof of wealth. If the commission approved Adrian's appointment based on those accounts, Percival could later expose the fraud and control the Duke through blackmail, or destroy him entirely. At the docks, smoke rose above Warehouse 47. Percival's carriage stood near the river. Rosalind entered through a side door, while Ellison went to find dock officers. Inside, Mercer poured oil across stacked crates. Harcourt sat bound to a chair, the treasury case still chained to his wrist. Percival was searching through a metal cabinet. Rosalind remained behind the crates and whispered to Clara, "Find the copper plate. I will reach Harcourt." She crossed the warehouse while Mercer's back was turned. Harcourt's eyes widened when he saw her. "Do not speak." Using a broken piece of metal, she sawed at the rope around his hands. "I never resigned," he whispered. "Percival kidnapped me after I discovered your marriage settlement had been altered." "In what way?" "A clause was added giving Adrian control of your inherited property if you were convicted of fraud." Rosalind stopped. Percival did not merely want the widow's cottages or Blackthorne's estate. He intended to seize the fortune Rosalind had inherited from her mother. Did Adrian know? No. But his genuine signature appears beneath the altered clause. Again, Percival had placed a false document beneath something Adrian willingly signed. A crash sounded near the cabinet. Clara stood holding a copper plate engraved with Rosalind's signature. Mercer seized her by the hair. Rosalind cut Harcourt's final rope and rushed forward, but Percival drew a pistol. "Set down the plate." Clara's hand shook. "If I obey, you will kill us anyway." Percival smiled. "You are finally as clever as your father." He aimed at her. Rosalind lifted an oil lantern. "Fire that pistol, and I drop this." Mercer glanced at the oil spreading beneath his boots. Percival hesitated. Harcourt raised the treasury case. "This contains copies of every document Percival submitted to the commission. He abducted me because I discovered the Blackthorne accounts were backed by the forged bonds." Outside, whistles sounded. Dock officers were approaching. Percival grabbed the case and pulled Harcourt toward the river doors. Mercer threw Clara aside and ignited the oil. Flames raced across the floor. Rosalind dragged Clara behind a stack of empty barrels. Mercer escaped, but Percival's path to the river was blocked by fire. He smashed a window and climbed onto the narrow dock beyond it, taking Harcourt with him. Rosalind and Clara followed through the smoke. Percival stood at the edge of the Thames, holding the pistol against Harcourt's neck. A small boat waited below. "Give me the copper plate," he ordered, "or your solicitor dies." Clara looked at Rosalind. Rosalind took the plate from her and stepped forward. "You cannot escape with the evidence," she said. "I do not need the evidence. I need its destruction." She held the plate over the water. Percival's eyes followed it. Harcourt drove his elbow backward into Percival's ribs. The pistol fired harmlessly into the air. Rosalind threw the copper plate toward Clara instead of the river. Clara caught it as dock officers rushed onto the platform. Mercer escaped in the boat, but Percival was seized and disarmed. Then Harcourt unlocked the treasury case. Inside were copies of the forged bonds, the altered marriage settlement, and a document bearing 6 trustees' signatures authorizing the sale of the widows' cottages. The sale was scheduled for noon. Rosalind checked the dot clock, 11:35. Even with Percival arrested, the auction could proceed unless the trustees withdrew their approval before the hammer fell, and one of those signatures belonged to Reverend Ellison. Rosalind held the auction authorization before Reverend Ellison. "Is this your signature?" His face paled. "Yes, but Percival told me it authorized an audit. You signed without reading it." The accusation struck him into silence. Rosalind turned to Harcourt. "Can the sale be stopped?" "Only if 4 trustees withdraw before noon, or if a judge suspends it." 23 minutes remained. Clara handed the copper plate to a dock officer and agreed to accompany him with Bellamy's statement. Harcourt took the altered settlement and treasury documents. Rosalind kept the auction order. "Where are the trustees?" "3 are attending the sale," Ellison said. "Mrs. Wycliffe knows where the others have gone." They reached Mill Street to find dozens of widows outside their cottages. Auction notices had been nailed to every door. Mrs. Wycliffe hurried toward Rosalind. "They said you stole our savings." "I did not." The older woman's eyes filled with shame. "Percival paid me to say you gave me the bond." Murmurs swept through the crowd. "Will you repeat that before witnesses?" Rosalind asked. Mrs. Wycliffe looked at the frightened women around her. "Yes." Inside the auction room, 3 trustees sat beside the broker. Percival's solicitor insisted the arrest changed nothing. "The sale begins in 8 minutes," he said. Rosalind laid the copper plate's official seizure receipt on the table. "This proves my signature was mechanically reproduced. It proves only that a plate exists." Harcourt displayed Bellamy's statement, and this identifies who commissioned it. The trustees exchanged uneasy looks. Rosalind addressed them directly. "You trusted Percival because Adrian trusted him. You condemned me because challenging a duchess seemed dangerous, until condemning one became easier. Now decide whether you will correct your mistake publicly." Reverend Ellison signed the first withdrawal. Sir Matthew Crane's deputy signed the second, after Harcourt revealed Vale Shipping had bribed the magistrate. The remaining trustees refused. 2 withdrawals were not enough. The clock struck noon. The broker raised his hammer. Then the doors opened. Adrian entered with his wounded arm in a sling. Behind him came the remaining trustees, escorted by Treasury officials. "I have withdrawn every Blackthorne guarantee supporting this sale," he announced. Percival's solicitor objected, but Adrian placed a signed confession on the table. It admitted that he had authorized the original £5,000 bond, concealed it from the board, and allowed Rosalind to be arrested to protect his appointment. Rosalind read the confession in silence. Adrian had finally told the truth, but only after she had uncovered it herself. The Treasury Commissioner stepped forward. "The auction is suspended. Lord Percival Vale, the magistrate, the bank manager, and all participating trustees will face inquiry." The widows began to weep with relief. Adrian turned to Rosalind. "I have resigned from the commission. That does not restore what you took from me." "No," he said, "but this may begin." He handed her a second document granting her sole authority over the fund and returning her inherited property beyond his control. Before Rosalind could answer, Clara rushed into the room. Mercer escaped with the original ledger. Harcourt frowned. "Without Percival, he has nowhere to take it." "Yes, he does," Clara replied. "The Treasury hearing begins tomorrow. Mercer plans to present the ledger as proof that Rosalind, not Percival, controlled every transfer." Rosalind looked at Adrian's confession. If Mercer altered the ledger before the hearing, Adrian's admission could implicate them both, while leaving Percival's larger scheme unproven. Then Mrs. Wycliffe spoke from the doorway. "I know where Mercer is going." She held up a key bearing the crest of Blackthorne House. Mrs. Wycliffe placed the key in Rosalind's palm. "Mercer gave it to me last night. He ordered me to enter Blackthorne House after the auction and burn the Duchess's private papers." "Why did you agree?" Adrian asked. "Because Percival threatened to put my grandson in prison for my debt." Rosalind examined the key. It opened the rear records room. The same room where she had once found scratches around her desk lock. "Mercer is returning to the estate," she said. "He needs my old account books to make the original ledger appear consistent with his alterations." Adrian ordered officers to accompany them, but Rosalind refused to enter through the main gates. "Mercer knows your carriage. Agnes and I will use the servants' passage. You are still the target, and you are wounded." Their eyes met. This time, Adrian did not argue. "Then I will secure the outside doors." At Blackthorne House, Rosalind and Agnes entered through the laundry courtyard. The servants' corridor was deserted. A light burned beneath the records room door. Inside, Mercer stood over a table covered with ledgers. He had already removed several pages from Bellamy's book and replaced them with copies bearing Rosalind's handwriting. Beside him sat a frightened young man. "Thomas read," Rosalind said. The copying clerk looked up sharply. Mercer reached for a pistol. Agnes struck his wrist with a fireplace poker. The weapon fell, but Mercer shoved her against the wall and fled through the adjoining study. Rosalind did not follow. She closed the records room door and faced Red. "Percival will blame you for everything. He promised me passage to America. Percival is under arrest, and Mercer has abandoned you." Red looked toward the open ledgers. Rosalind placed the embroidered bond record beside them. These stitches contain every legitimate serial number. The false sequence begins exactly where your copper plate was first used. Red's hands started trembling. "I only copied what Mercer brought me. Then testify tomorrow. He will kill me. Not if the Treasury officers take you into protection tonight." Adrian and the officers entered moments later. Mercer had escaped through an upstairs window, but the ledgers remained intact. Adrian looked at Red. "Did my wife forge the bonds?" "No, Your Grace. Say it before the commission." Red nodded. For the first time, Rosalind possessed a complete chain. Adrian's original signature, Bellamy's warning, the copper plate, the altered ledgers, the widow's testimony, and the clerk who manufactured the forgeries. Yet one question remained. "Why did Percival target me?" she asked. Red swallowed. "Because your mother's inheritance contains shares in the Eastborough Canal. Those shares will triple in value when Parliament approves the new trade route." Rosalind understood. Her conviction would transfer control of the shares through the altered marriage settlement. Percival planned to bankrupt Adrian, acquire Blackthorne's land, seize Rosalind's inheritance, and gain control of the canal route. Adrian's ambition had opened every door. A shot rang out upstairs. The officers rushed toward the staircase. Mercer appeared on the gallery holding Agnes at gunpoint. He had circled back through the servants' wing. "Give me Bellamy's ledger," he shouted, "or the maid dies." Rosalind lifted the book. Adrian stepped in front of her. "Take me instead." Mercer laughed. "You were always the easiest one to use, Your Grace." Agnes drove her heel into Mercer's knee. As he stumbled, Adrian pulled her aside, and the officers seized him. The ledger fell from Rosalind's hands, but landed safely on the carpet. Mercer was dragged away. By dawn, the evidence had been sealed under independent custody. Treasury officials assembled the witnesses for the public hearing. Rosalind changed out of her burned prison dress and chose a plain black gown. She wore no jewels and carried only the embroidered strip. As she entered the hearing chamber, every nobleman who had condemned her turned to stare. Percival sat in chains beside Mercer and the bank manager. Adrian stood at the witness table. The commissioner raised Adrian's confession. "Your Grace, before we hear the Duchess's evidence, you must answer one question under oath." He looked directly at Adrian. "Did you know your wife might be innocent when you signed the order sending her to Newgate?" Adrian's face went still. Rosalind waited. This answer would determine whether he chose the truth, even when it destroyed the last defense of his own honor. "Yes," Adrian answered. The single word silenced the chamber. "When I signed the transfer order, I knew Rosalind's objections were credible. I sent her to Newgate because a public inquiry would have exposed my misuse of the fund and cost me the Treasury appointment." Percival stared at him in disbelief. Adrian continued, "Lord Vale exploited my ambition, but he did not create it. I authorized the first bond, ignored my wife's warnings, surrendered her records to him, and allowed her name to bear the disgrace that belonged partly to me. The commissioner turned to Rosalind. "Your Grace, present your evidence." She began with the embroidered strip, matching its 112 legitimate serial numbers against the official register. Bond 113, and the entire false sequence appeared nowhere in her independent record. Clara presented her father's statement. Thomas Red identified the copper plate used to reproduce Rosalind's signature. Harcourt produced the altered marriage settlement, while Mrs. Wycliffe admitted Percival had bribed and threatened her. Finally, Bellamy's original ledger revealed the money's path. Adrian's £5,000 investment entered Vale Shipping. Percival multiplied the loss through forged bonds, used the widows' names to secure fraudulent loans, and planned to seize their cottages, Blackthorne's mortgaged land, and Rosalind's canal shares. The duplicate signet ring connected Percival to the false seals. The prison records tied Mercer to Clara's imprisonment and the fire. Percival rose in fury. None of this would have succeeded without Blackthorne. Rosalind faced him. "That is true. You built the scheme, but Adrian opened the doors." The commissioner ordered Percival, Mercer, the bank manager, and the corrupt magistrate held for trial on charges including fraud, conspiracy, unlawful confinement, arson, and attempted murder. Vale Shipping's assets were frozen to repay the widows. Thomas Red received protection in exchange for full testimony. Clara inherited the recovered balance owed to her father and was appointed assistant auditor of the restored fund. Then judgment turned toward Adrian. His treasury appointment was formally withdrawn. He was ordered to repay the original £5,000 with interest from his private property. His financial authority over the widows' fund was permanently revoked. Adrian accepted every condition. Before the assembled nobles and trustees, he declared Rosalind innocent and named his own failures without asking her forgiveness. He transferred the Mill Street cottages into an independent trust, restored her inherited shares, and granted her sole control of the charity she had built. Outside the chamber, he approached her without touching her. "I have arranged a separate residence for myself," he said. "Blackthorne House is yours if you wish it." "I do not." Pain crossed his face, but he nodded. "What do you want?" "The Eastborough house my mother left me. The fund's offices will move there, and the cottages will remain protected. It will be done." Adrian removed the ducal signet ring and placed it on the table between them. "I used this name as though it excused every choice I made." Rosalind did not take the ring. "Repair what you damaged," she said, "not to win me back, but because it is owed. And us? There is no us for you to claim. If anything remains one day, I will decide it freely." 3 months later, Rosalind opened the new Widows' Trust at Eastborough House. Clara managed the accounts, Agnes supervised the residence, and Mrs. Wycliffe received the first permanent cottage deed. Adrian attended only as a donor. He stood at the rear without title or privilege, then left before anyone could praise him. Rosalind entered her new office and unlocked a fresh ledger. Once, a forged book had been used to imprison her. Now every page belonged to her authority. She wrote the first entry in her own hand, closed the cover, and turned the key.